So that's always the question that a lot of, we are asked a lot when we are beginning to translate new materials to the human patient. Amazingly, even CD38 and 138, they work very well in human patients, that even though they are present in other cells, we find that the activated form in tumor cells are unique and allows the uptake to be much higher, either due to higher expression levels or the different types or structural changes that allow us to enhance uptake in the tumor relative to the surrounding tissues. So nature helps us a lot here. The vascular system, the microenvironment of the tumors allow us to retain more of the materials in the target areas, and also that the activated state is more pronounced in the tumor than in the healthy normal tissues. Yes, that's a very good question. I didn't go into the full explanation of that. So we know that light therapy is used today for skin diseases and lesions, anything you can shine light on. So you add a small drug that's called a photosensitizer, which is simply a word for a drug that's sensitive to light. And once you shine light on those drugs, it generates tons of free radicals that become toxic inside the cells. So what we've done is that this therapy cannot be used for multiple myeloma because we can't shine light from outside and get it right to where we want it. And what we've done is to come up with a different way, use what the tumor cells already love to eat, and let that generate the light that we can use to kill them. And effectively what we've done is that we are taking drugs that we know can be stimulated either by radiation alone or by the light that's emitted by these imaging agents that you already have in the clinic today. So by doing it that way, we know that, for example, FDG is taken up by these proliferating cells, which are mainly the multiple myeloma cells. And then we know that the drugs we can deliver it selectively to that. And so when they come together, they can now, the light is coming right from the tumor, inside instead of outside. And the final point is that we also make sure that they are removed by different organs. For example, we want the FDG, the radionuclide, to be removed by, say, the kidneys, and we want the photosensitizers to be removed by the liver. That way, the intersection they have will only be within the tumor environment, and therefore we not have any toxic effect outside there.
None that I know of. Give it to the German.
Actually, I know this question. German patients obviously ask the same. The problem is with research. Just an example, there is a part of green tea which seems to work against plasma cells, and the former head of the department in Heidelberg developed an amyloidosis which is related to multiple myeloma, and he retired and did some kind of popular research on that, I would say. The problem is we wanted to do a clinical trial with that. We didn't get any funding. The problem was no pharma company, because they are dedicated to fund drugs that are newly developed that can be sold. I mean, that's what they do, and that's okay. But it's very difficult nowadays to do a clinical trial without adequate funding. And there are like grants from governmental sources, but it's very difficult. It costs really tens of millions of dollars and euros. So it's very difficult, and so we do what we can do, but some things at the moment we can do if, yeah.
I take the traditional British approach, which is to search around France and go for somewhere where there's like the Gironde, and select red wine, and then a half a bottle a day is the optimum, I've heard. And this is based on pure science fact, which is that fresh claret contains large amounts of sirtuins, which are a variety of histone deacetylase inhibitors, and they work much better than panabinostat.
And isn't there also isn't there also a case where green tea, for example, has had negative effects on certain drugs?
I think you have to be careful. I absolutely agree that it would make sense to. And my patients ask, what else can I do? I totally understand that, but the problem is, if without any research, as was said, it was actually in the German Cancer Research Center where they found that the green tea, together with bortezomib, lowered the effectiveness of bortezomib, which is bad again. So patients, if you go around the room, you have all heard about stuff. And my aunt's daughter's husband's friend has this other cancer and it worked perfect. He was cured after 1 week. You should be really cautious about that. And I don't want to ridicule this. There is this need for that, but as I said, it's really difficult to do research. And we are people, we are scientists, we try to stick to that. And there are other people who are more interested in that stuff, and maybe they know more about that, but I think we're not educated in this direction enough.
I think the breast cancer activists really did a great job in the 70s that changed the whole landscape of breast cancer research and outcome today. And today we have quite a lot of research going on breast cancer. The improvement has been enormous. So that power to persuade our legislators to create funds for multiple myeloma similar to what they have for breast cancer will be very helpful. For example, we know DOD has this set aside money, millions of dollars every year that is used to support the work that's going on. So I think there's also this wrong impression, I think, out there that if you want to do research, it shouldn't be a multiple myeloma. That patients are already surviving, that they are doing better. Okay, that's the news there. If you write a grant proposal today and say, I want to work on multiple myeloma, a lot of young people are discouraged because they don't get funded. They are instead asked to write grant proposals on diseases that they think have more visibility, such as pancreatic cancer, brain tumors, and other things. So being out there to make it more known that we still have problems to be solved here is going to be very helpful down the line.
If I may, any public policy groupies out there? I worked on this for about 10 years, and I was very much involved on the grassroots side for the doubling of the NIH funds, and from 1998 to 2003. One thing you should be aware, the problem, it's very, very, very hard to get cancer advocates to be politically active. And I think part of that is the more cancer organizations become professionalized, the more they look out for their type of cancer. And the more organizations become professionalized, the more they look out for the interests of their organization. That wasn't the case up until 2003 when they weren't very professionalized. You had basically people like me who were poorly paid but highly motivated to do something about it. And we realized we had to check our baggage at the door, and we had to come together. And the whole funding of the NIH was really grounded in the idea of getting more funding for the National Cancer Institute, which is the largest of the NIH institutes. And what we realized when we sat in a room together is that if we're successful, we're going to make enemies of all the other disease advocates out there. So we asked them to come along and said, well, instead of doubling the funding for NCI, let's do it for NIH. What you should know is that today, even though the funding has basically dried up, it hasn't dried up, but it's just remained stagnant. And by remaining stagnant, there is 75, compared to 100% of research activity in 2003 that NIH funded, today it funds 75%. It's gone down dramatically. The government, and this has been a bipartisan retreat. It's not Republican or Democrat or anything. It's all across the board. And that's because cancer patients can't create a strong political constituency whether you are with them or against them. The example we need to look at are the people that do the Right to Life March in Washington every year. They shut down Washington every year for 2 or 3 days. You can't move on the grounds of Capitol Hill without bumping into people. They clog up the subways and the metros. What we need in cancer is something like that. But the will of the professionalized organizations is not there to do something like that. They would rather have their myeloma advocacy day, their breast cancer advocacy day, their this day or that day, and it spreads it out over the year and it dilutes it. And if they all had their days on the same day, and if they all went up there and made sure that nobody on Capitol Hill could move for 2 or 3 days without having people like you in their faces and saying this has to be a national priority, nothing much more is going to happen about it. And that's a hard thing. And I quite honestly gave up on this in 2005 because I saw what was happening. But there does need to be a political movement. And as I always say to people who have cancer, being diagnosed with cancer is not a political act. That's the way you feel about it. And the longer you're a patient, you realize that politics is a part of that. So I apologize for the sermon, but I feel really deeply about this. Does anybody else have a question? No, I guess everybody's just kind of wiped out, huh? Well, with that, I've got 3. First of all, I want to thank our faculty, and let's give our faculty a round of applause.